Well, hi, I'm Nina Alvarez. I did not make this movie. Julian made this movie. Julian. And oh my goodness, here's Terrance. So we thought we'd take the opportunity that these guys happen to be in town to ask them some questions. Tough questions. So why don't you guys make your way over and, oh yeah, mics would be awesome.
Okay, sure.
Thanks. Oh, great. Okay.
Did they work?
Hello?
Well, I just want to say first, as we're getting started, that thank you all. As I think all of you know, many of you here know me, and other special guests are here, and other people who were able to get a ticket. Just that, thanks for coming to the New York premiere. I was living in New York when I started this project 9 years ago this month, and so it's just awesome to be, and there's actually so many people, I would actually forget, but I'll try to mention a couple people. So I'm so excited that tonight, like, my book editor, Alex Starr, is here. And my literary agent, Zoe Penamenta, is here. And those two are people who are here all the way at the beginning, all the way back. As are many people, actually Nina Alvarez is a consulting producer on the project. She was out for 2 different shoots, including a trial and another earlier shoot, and was also helping get this project finished. So thanks for being here, Nina, who's a film professor at Columbia Journalism School. Dale Maharaj, speaking of Columbia, is here. I think Zan Parker, are you here? Zan Parker is here, who's a consulting producer. I don't know if Sabrina Gordon is here or not. We were texting before, I didn't get the last text. Mark Benelli, thanks for being here. And I mean, I'm sure Marie Helen, there's all of you are here who have, many of you rather, played a role in this film, so thanks for being here. And I just also wanted to bring up to the stage, because it's such a great opportunity, and I was so excited when he called me after having seen the film just roughly like a week or 2 ago. But I want to introduce Aqeela Sherrills, who is a former Crip from Watts, who long ago became an activist like Terrance, was doing amazing work. You saw a little clip in here about the Truce of 9 Deuce. He was a co-founder of this movement, which is a hugely important effort, one of the first of its kind, maybe the first. There's more about that in the book. There's more about a lot of this in the book, I should mention, actually, because if you like the movie, you might like the book also.
So buy it on Amazon and give it
But Aqeela was involved all the way back, and now most recently he's a co-founder of the community-based public safety collective, which has gotten funding by Biden. There's a new effort which I want him to sort of chime in on and give us a context for where this even story stands and what he's doing and what's going on with the anti-violence and anti-gang efforts. And that movement is, anyway, something I am excited to hear more about and to have him here for. So Aqeela, please come up. So, okay, well, do you have, like, we could just open it for questions, or I don't know if you wanted to start with any questions. Okay. Let's start.
I don't know if this is working. Is it? Hello.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay. So, when I first came onto the project, which was before the first shoot, there were 2 questions that I had. One was, okay, there's this guy, he's this activist, he's like personable, but like, yeah, he shot somebody. So what made you think that there was more to this?
Well, there were a lot of different stages of it. I mean, for sure at the outset, and there was a New York Times story when the shooting happened, and it alone piqued my interest, not only because of the shooting and because the community was clearly sort of like, there seemed to be a lot of division, at least as the way it was being characterized over it, and also it was happening in this neighborhood that was clearly gentrifying, you know, and Terrance had been a part of that. So there were a lot of questions that I had. One of the things that was clear when I got, started reporting it on the ground was that there were just so many different perspectives in the neighborhood that I was hearing that I thought were really illuminating and interesting, and also begged further questions, and they weren't being represented in what was becoming a voluminous amount of media coverage of the case, certainly locally. But one of the quotes I kept, working with my editor on the film to I felt it was important to get in was an activist in Denver named Jason McBride, who he says early on that if it were me, I would have made sure everyone caught something. And he was talking about if he were in Terrance's situation, he would have been shooting everyone. And I thought that alone to me was for a lot of people who I was hearing the questions about, because in the neighborhood, a lot of people I spoke to were not being like, yeah, Terrance, but he shot someone. They were like, yeah, I would have shot all of those guys. So that was sort of interesting, but also just that, I was starting to get this sort of, not only from Terrance, but then from other people, the question of whether or not Terrance had been targeted that day and what was behind that. So of course that was a major interest of mine.
And so for Terrance, when you're in the middle of this, there was a whole lot of coverage. It wasn't necessarily friendly toward you. It wasn't very sympathetic. So when Julian comes over and is like, hey, I want to hang out with you, tell me your deepest, darkest secrets. What are you thinking? And you're like, plus like he's not somebody you were hanging out with.
Julian's cool to hang out with.
Well, now you know that, but come on. Honestly, in the beginning.
He's gotten a lot cooler. He started off cool, but he's got he got some swag to him, he got a little soul to him, he got lish, he got a soul.
Yeah, but what was it? What did you think about that first approach? How did he approach you? And what were your first thoughts? Was there anything that you thought, oh man, this is a bad idea? Or what was it that made you just open the door even slightly?
So I was going through my emails. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning actually, and I was getting hundreds of emails from all kind of journalists from other cities and everything. So I was literally just like click, just delete. Because locally, they were listening to Carl McKay and all those Bloods. Mm-hmm. They were literally just saying anything about me, because a lot of the local journalists in Denver are married or they're dating law enforcement. So they had this big illusion in them, right? God. And so when we think about policing, we always think like these tall white men from Mississippi, right? But no, like a lot of these cops who told those Bloods to jump me, they're young African American and Latino and white guys who were all poor. They're from Miami, from Los Angeles, from Chicago, and these guys were young guys. They were my age, we have played basketball with them. They knew me, so some of them were ex-gang members, but they were working for the Denver Police Department, from the military, from Afghanistan, from Iraq. So these guys were rough guys. So when they were dealing with these local media people, they were destroying my life. They were lying on me, slandering me. They let Carl McKay, who was on camera telling Hassan to assault me, then moved into my office. I was just saying to Nadia in the back, when have computers ever cost $99? Wasn't the first computer like $150,000 or something like that? It's like as big as this theater. So as soon as I seen that, I was just like, $99 computers. What's going on around here? Carl, we already know you're the biggest dope dealer in Denver. Now you're selling computers for $99, right? So when Julian, when I seen his name, and I say this all the time, but something about the name Julian Rubinstein, I was like, sounds like a good journalist to me. So I clicked on it. I was like, let me see what this guy has to say. If it was like Channel 9 or Fox 31, it would have been like, delete. But it's like, look, I live in New York. I read about this in the New York Times. I don't know you from Adam, but I just want to know what happened. And I didn't know it was going to be this. I didn't know it was going to be like this big movie or this book. I didn't know Julian's skills or potential. I just needed a journalist outside of Denver who wasn't connected to local law enforcement. Because I didn't need him to do a puff piece on me. I'm not ashamed of even I'm ashamed of, like, I wasn't healthy in this documentary, mentally, physically. You guys see the difference. You guys see me. I was looking at life, man. These guys attacked me for no reason. I wasn't doing anything. I'm not a perfect person, but I didn't deserve for a bunch of bloods to murder me, over some plastic basketball courts. We've lost hundreds of kids over those courts were plastic, mind you. I installed them. And let me tell you, it wasn't worth the loss, okay? So when he said that I'm outside of this situation, but I want to know what happened, I didn't have a reason to not trust Julian. So I said, yes, well, let me tell you my side of the story. And of course, you guys see me talking crap to Julian because I had to grow into knowing that he wasn't just there only to tell my side of the story. He was there to tell the totality of what happened. This whole process has taught me a lot about journalism, independent journalism, filmmaking, the importance of it. Activism, I learned my stance on activism from going to Los Angeles, staying at Aqeela's house in Watts, and going to the projects in Watts and living. He was running the Watts Art Gallery at the time, and I was staying there with him. So I learned a lot from Julian, but I had no reason not to trust him. So when he said he was outside of this, I didn't have a problem with telling him my side of the story.
I think that there had been initially when in the rollout of the film, that there had been a lot of, apprehension or caution over a white director telling a story perceived as a black story. And that, I think, actually, do you think there's any validity in that, in who gets to tell this story?
Yeah, there's definitely validity in it because there is an issue with media justice for black people. Too often people do come into black or brown communities, or men are telling stories about women. It's like, no, a woman could have told that story. Because
white men are always telling stories about all this.
Yeah. There's so many white men. It just so happens we're in America. Like, it just so happens that, that's where we're at. But, I wish it could have been some African-American journalist who told my story. But I'm going to tell you, I wasn't initially thinking about that. Because in Denver, Colorado, most of the journalists are just white. If you Google Malcolm X right now, I guarantee you'll see a white journalist go talking to Malcolm X from NBC, ABC, some of his biggest media interviews were from white journalists. So I wasn't thinking about that till the people who did not want to be exposed, they started bringing up the fact that he was white. But I didn't feel like Julian was there to do like some type of minstrel step and fetch it story. I just viewed Julian as a journalist, and that's what he's always presenting himself as, is just a journalist. Even when I was upset he was hanging with those guys and all those things, he was still in his integrity. I had to learn that it wasn't just about me, that he had to get all these different sides. But I never had an issue with his skin color, because if black people were waiting for only black journalists to do the thousands of stories that need to be told in black communities, in New York, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, would never get all those stories told. So I'm glad Julian came. I don't care what he looked like. Y'all don't care if he was a woman with 3 breasts and 9 ears. As long as you can tell the story correctly, it shouldn't matter what you look like or your sexuality or your gender or whatever. If you can do the job, then do the job and do it correctly. And he did that, and I appreciate him for that.
I know I'm supposed to be asking questions, but I do have a comment about this, which is, watching the film again, it occurred to me tonight, like, okay, if a black journalist, black filmmaker had made this film, it would have come across as, oh, this is like an agenda film. This is, it would have almost engendered more distrust, which is a sad statement about who we believe, right? Because a black filmmaker or a black storyteller to take on Denver PD and say, you guys are setting us up is kind of easier for a white journalist to pull off. What do you think, Julian? And then I have a question for you, Aqeela, about that.
I mean, geez, because there's a lot, to this, and I've dealt with it, tried to really address it in every way, of course, by having multiple team members who are African American, who worked on the film in every capacity, as well as readers of the book who are reading it, both from the community and national readers who are African American, for sensitivity and just trying to make sure that I'm thinking of everything I should be thinking about. But I did actually have a couple people tell me, and I think I've told you that toward the end, I didn't expect this at all, that they thought, African Americans from the neighborhood told me they thought it would have been very hard for an African American to do it, because they would have been seen as, they would have been not trusted and potentially even more in danger because of sort of blowback from community forces or elements. But and it is true what Terrance was saying, like one of the things that's happened, of course, it does make me, like the easiest way to attack this film is that, like if you just want to grab at something. And so there are people who don't like the film because of they're in it and they're maybe exposed in a way that they're not happy about. And that's something that they've been pushing heavily in Denver. But thankfully in Denver, we've had like an amazing run. It just was extended 3 times. It was played for a whole month. And also it was absolutely because of the support of the black community that won the audience award at the Denver Film Festival. There's Portia Prescott, by the way, the president of the Rocky Mountain NAACP, who's been a big supporter. Here tonight, grew up in the neighborhood, and you're going to get your chance.
I just want to say, it's hard for me to watch. It's just, so the question that you asked is the most pivotal question, and I don't want to, I've watched it several times. I lived it. My house is in the film.
Yeah. That was her house I was living in, guys.
And that was my computer.
You did not have a double life, which was
Her computer almost got me a life sentence.
Me and FBI. But no, I say that because, I think I've never heard that question asked the way you coined it. I hate to be on camera saying it. I do feel politically correct, especially as an NAACP president for Colorado, Montana, and Wyoming, that there is a lot of validity in the truth that he exposed. I don't know how to fix it. I think that's why this movie is so pivotal because this is happening across the country on how things are systemic, and when we fight the system, we can't fight it a certain way. And so it's very difficult for me to watch this because I know too many people who died, too many people in incarceration, I've lost too many uncles. But that is the most pivotal question, because if a black person had done this film, considering how he had to live at my house, you guys, because they didn't want him alive right now. He is not supposed to be here standing. It's not like, oh, we're in New York, woohoo. I mean, yeah, we are kind of like that. Look at my TikTok. But you don't understand how many people were trying to kill him to not have his story. And if you think of a historic moment of Malcolm X, you think of, everybody, Medgar Evers, MLK, anybody black that is doing what he's doing is supposed to be dead by now, right? Tupac, Biggie. Anytime you stand out and have a voice, you're not supposed to be around to talk about this. So I say this very fervently because I've lost 3 uncles to the game. And I say it because that is the key question. I have been around a lot of questions. I'm not going to say anything negative about the people that you guys have seen because I grew up with them. I know our mayor. I know Reverend Leon Kelly. I know a lot of these people. This is our history. But this is happening in every city across America. So this story isn't just about the Holly. It's happening in Idaho. It's happening in Wyoming. It's happening in Montana. It's happening in all these different places. And it's the system, right? So Terrance just happened to survive it. And I say it because we weren't supposed to know each other. Who knew we knew each other? So we had to make sure he was safe so that he could tell his story, so that all of you amazing people came into my home because I wanted his story to be told. Not like I'm thinking I'm all that. I'm just like,
You all that?
but I was like, bleep, bleep, bleep. You know, I gotta come back to my house. Don't be getting me shot, right? You know what I mean? I'm just saying that we have to have. I have had.
I have to say,
as a woman.
I have to say that when I walked into that house, I was like, Julian, you want to tell me something about Terrance? What's going on here?
It was a mansion.
No, but I said.
But I want to bring Aqeela into
But
this
that's
because I
not
think
what
you raised some really
I just
great.
say that women can survive it sometimes when our black men can't. So I'm gonna shut up. But that's the problem. I can survive it, but our black men can't.
Well, I want to bring Aqeela into this conversation because there was a moment in the film where there are known activists who point to this experience as a whole system being put together to destroy him, to destroy this voice, to destroy this, like, you know, basically someone who's exposing a system. Can you speak to that? How does this reflect a larger reality in America?
Well, first I would just say that, this is the second time I watched the film, and each time I watched it and the folks that I shared it with, it just brings me to tears. Because true to your words, brother, like, when you had your transformation in prison, and said that you read the autobiography of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and that it inspired you, and you wanted your life, to be not in vain, that you wanted to give back in that type of way. You are that.
Yeah.
And thank you, Julian, for telling the story. I mean, this was hard, I know. And I was a part of a movement. I grew up in the projects in Watts. And, during the 90s, when we had a very similar time to a few years ago when George Floyd was publicly executed, for us, it was, gang violence happening in the neighborhood, hundreds of black and brown, young men losing their lives every day. And the system turning a deaf ear, to what was happening. So they labeled as gangs, because the label in itself dehumanized the people behind it, and it desensitized the public to our cry for help. And honestly, journalists played a huge role in that, because of like how you said, like how they rephrased the story. Just like, a lot of folks know that the head of the union was married, to the on-air personality in Minneapolis, right?
Well, and you had it in that scene where the local reporter was saying you planted the knife.
That's
and,
right.
you
Right.
know, and she said, well, that's what the prosecutor said.
Absolutely. So
The
there's
prosecutor
a trifecta.
said what she said, actually.
Right.
That's what really happened.
So there's been a trifecta between law enforcement, academia, doing evidence-based research, and we become subjects in our community, and law enforcement, creating this trifecta so that they control the narrative around who owns safety in our community, right? You say public safety and people say police, and the reality is that police are only one aspect of a public safety ecosystem. They've had part of the solution, right? Right? Somebody's killed in our neighborhood, we apprehend the perpetrator, but they never deployed therapists and healers and counselors
Before the killing.
right, and after, to address the traumatic stress disorder and hypervigilance that was allowed to ripple and fester in our neighborhoods, right? And so the media will say, hey, 3 gang members were shot and killed in the Holly, and people be like, yeah, because the narrative was that they were like the mafia, they were organized and centralized, and they should be eradicated. And the reality is that if they rephrased the story and said who it really was, there were 3 14-year-old boys that was killed in the Holly. People would be like, oh my, those babies. And it would be a different response. But because it's black boys,
And gang members.
right, and gang members, it might as well be insurgents. You know what I'm saying?
Or terrorists, as they call it. I mean,
Absolutely,
it
right?
might as well be terrorists, just a label.
So let me,
And-
let
and
me,
so-
let me,
And-
let me,
Go ahead.
but I do want to ask about, like, is Hassan also a tragic figure in this story?
Absolutely. Hassan is a victim of a society that doesn't even see him, as human. You know, he's a victim of a culture that sees black boys, as I mean, the system failed this kid over and over again. You heard the story that the guy was saying. He said this dude is living in squalor from pillow to post and rats and roaches. You know what I'm saying? It's like, and the thing is that like, who is there to provide like, the type of resources and services that folks need to rehabilitate, right? I'm a victim and a survivor of violence. My son was murdered, and I'm pretty well respected in the neighborhood, so I could have, gave the call and cats would have like, went on a mission, But I told my partners and my son's friends that was my son's legacy, that we hadn't been working 16 years on the front line and in the trenches to stop the killing in the neighborhood to allow my son's death to trigger a war. I was like, killing this kid ain't gonna bring my son back.
That's gonna cause hundreds of deaths.
That's right. That's right. We're committed to a whole nother level of change, right? And so the thing is that like what we witnessed happening, growing up in our neighborhood, is that law enforcement was deeply invested in the problem. Mm-hmm. They justified their budgets based upon how much violence was happening in the neighborhood. Y'all remember The Wire, right? Yeah. When McNulty created the fake serial killer in order to keep his budget. Like, these things are real, and we didn't know it. Like, we organized the peace treaty, we were celebrating and everything, and gang homicides dropped 44%.
How'd that happen? Can you tell people how that happened? Because that really inspired me how y'all did it in Watts.
It was marching in all of the different housing projects. I mean, violence is about.
When y'all first said, let's go over here, when y'all first initiated the truce, because people think that it was because what's his name was beaten by the police, Rodney King, but you guys were going to do the truce of 9 Deuce before he was beaten.
Oh, absolutely. We started in '88. So we had already had discussions. We was meeting, at the local masjid, having meetings. Jim Brown was financing a lot of, pulling us together, fathering us out of the neighborhood, feeding us, helping to pay for broke down cars, diapers, hardships, all types of stuff, right? And my brother Daoud, was inspired, and we believed that if we bought the 4 major housing projects together, we would create a domino effect across the city, for peace. Now, we were able to do that. It changed the quality of life in the neighborhood. And again, we thought that that law enforcement would celebrate with us. But one of the road cops in the neighborhood told us to be a cold day in hell before he ever support the peace treaty. He said, I make $60,000 a year as a base salary. He said, I make another $60,000 in overtime. Right. He said, I'm putting my daughter through college on your ignorance. That's what he told us. Wow. They were invested in us dying in the community.
Urban War Industrial Complex.
So this is like a central point in the film that I don't, I think it's a bit, it's not.
Can we
it's a very.
Though, Julian and Terrance.
Sorry?
I don't know.
I'm sorry?
No, I just want to say that they're part of this movement. Everyone here listening to this story is now a part of the change. Mm-hmm. One thing I have learned is that when you go home tonight and listening to these 3 men speak, you are a part of the change. You have a social media, you have a community that you influence, and they're a part of making sure this story reverberates. Mm-hmm.
The question is, what happened here with law enforcement in Denver is, okay, it's too good a gig, right, to give up. This anti-gang unit, the federal money.
Let me give you some numbers.
So, and I think it's worldwide, right? Like we're just seeing in the past week, in El Salvador, for example, you have, like the Salvadoran government just arrested 63,000 people with tattoos, whether verified gang members, whether they had committed crimes or not. And this is 1,000% supported by the Salvadoran people. And like you said, all you have to say is gang members, not necessarily boys, gang members.
Here's the data. Connie Rice, a prominent civil rights attorney in LA, 17 years ago did a call to action. They did a study in LA and basically said that less than 3 to 5% of so-called gang members are actually committing violent crime and murder. all right?
3 to 5%.
3 to 5%. Today, this is law enforcement data, says that 2% of the population is producing 80 to 90% of the harm, right? So if we're going to have data-informed and data-driven strategies, right, and we follow that, 911, the data says that 38 to 40% of 911 calls are for non-serious, non-violent calls, right? Here's the thing. Last year alone, they spent $307 billion, the federal government, states, and cities, on violence prevention, right, and intervention. They spent $150 million on community-based solutions. Now, the work that Terrance was doing, as you saw the graph, when he launched Prodigal Son and the Camel movement, violence decreased significantly. Because as he said, nobody can stop this war but us, right? So we developed a whole movement out of it. And last year, the Biden administration invested over $200 million, $250 million through the Safer Communities Act. I had the fortune of running the White House Community Violence Intervention Collaborative, which was to build the capacity of organizations like Prodigal Son in 16 cities across the country as complementary strategies to law enforcement. Now, there is a backlash to it as well, right? We need a comprehensive strategy, one that invests in law enforcement, procedural justice training, because they are killing us out there now. You know what I'm saying? And we need community-based solutions to be invested in simultaneously so that you have a both-and strategy and approach, right? And there is a push out there. The same thing that happened in the Holly is the same thing that's happening in multiple cities across the country right now. So we're the TTA provider now for the federal government, for BJA. They allocated $100 million last year to community violence intervention strategies, to community-based organizations, cities, and law enforcement agencies all across the country. And my agency is providing the training and technical assistance to help build the capacity of these, or help them to implement these strategies in these respective communities.
Not necessarily the Reverend Kellys of the world.
But I'm telling you, the Reverend Kellys of the world have applied for this money.
And they did it.
That absolutely. And so here's the thing.
I know he's taking the shirt off because he did everything right. He had the board, he had the finances,
That's right.
He had the investors. Like, I know because when he built a board, he built it of corporate angel investors, everything that you would build a seat, a Fortune 500 from. I think it's hard for me to watch this film and know what I lived because he built it under the same system that made this organization thrive. He didn't cut any corners, and he had the board of Fortune 500 multimillionaires on his board. And I'm sorry, Julian, I don't mean to interrupt, but it's very difficult to know that I'm looking at a black man who did everything right, and they still wanted him to fail.
All of those big organizations.
Well, but he did everything right for whom? Right?
For his community.
For your community, which isn't necessarily what some of those people also had in mind.
I'm gonna say this, and then I'm gonna pass the mic back to my brother, because this is about this champion and this hero, because this film, validates everything that he was saying and everything that folks who are doing the type of work that he's doing all across the country. I want to just, my brother Dame, Damon Durden and Shane Love back here, who run the Newark Community Street Team. Like lifelong residents of Newark, started an organization with nothing. And Newark was on the top 10 most violent city list for 50 consecutive years. 7 consecutive years in a row now. When they started to work in 2014, right? 103 murders and 103 homicides in Newark. Today, 50-year low, they have 50 homicides last year. They started an organization with nothing, with 16 independent contractors. They have over 120 staff. They run the ecosystem in terms of community violence intervention strategies in the city, and just was named by the Department of Justice as one of the 7 trailblazing organizations in the country. This is one of hundreds of organizations that was sparked by brothers like Terrance. You know what I'm saying? So this is a rally cry, because those same folks that he partnered with at the Holly, the developers who then got in bed with the cops, and the feds to undermine the same strategy that he's built. This is still happening in cities all across the country, and I'm dealing with it right now. Drafting op-eds for the organizations, developing toolkits and crisis communication strategies for the organizations, because guess what? He or she who controls the narrative controls the game. around public safety. This is a multi-trillion-dollar industry, and folks do not want to let it go, and they will kill us to maintain it, But this, it's like we say, God plans and the devil plans, and God is the best of planners, brother. And I am so grateful, for you standing tall and continuing to fight that system. I love it when you was when they was telling you to be quiet and stuff. Freedom of speech. This is America. You know what I'm saying? You have the right to say whatever you want to say. You know what I'm saying? And as a black man, they tried to shut you down. But guess what? You know what I'm saying? Everybody stand on your feet, man. Give this brother a round of applause. I mean, he is living. He is an example of everything that we hope to be. And I'm humble, brother. And Julian, man, thank you, brother, for making the sacrifice, because it's heavy.
Let me say something about Aqeela real quick. So, when Julian said I model my work off of the Truths and Nine Dudes, see, like Aqeela, he's to the point where now he talks more bigger policy. But when Aqeela was in Watts before all of this,
That's right.
I remember sitting in LA and just listening, because in Denver, I'm the big mouth and I'm the big activist. But when I'm in LA, there's like Crips that are like 7'5" in the Bloods, and I'm sitting in LA like, let me just shut up and just listen real quick. And I remember sitting in the Watts Art Gallery, and I remember listening to Aqeela and all these other Crips and Bloods, and it was like, we just walked over there and said, I wonder what's gonna happen if we go over there and see what they say. And we just walked over there and said, what's up? What y'all wanna do? Let's stop killing each other. And I was like, yes. And I was like, we can do that in Denver, because I know Gerald. And I know some of those Crips and Bloods. Before we were Crips and Bloods, we were best friends. Like, we were cool, man. Like, I know his mom. And so I'm listening to Aqeela. We weren't doing that in Denver. And Aqeela didn't say, no, we got a grant. And we went with the LAPD, and we went over there with the grant. We got a $50. He said, no, we were sitting in the Jordan Downs, a bunch of Grape Street Crips, and said, I wonder what would happen if we went and talked to these black men that we knew as children.
That's right.
Because we're not animals. We're not children. It's okay to say you a Blood, a Crip, a Kappa, whatever you want to say. You work for Google. I don't care what you
Don't say that.
I don't care what label you put on yourself. I care about how you treat people and if you're murdering people. That's what I'm not against law enforcement. I'm against law enforcement murdering people like Breonna Taylor, like George Floyd, and not getting justice because they have qualified immunity. I'm not against development. I'm against building a bunch of so-called affordable housing, but there's thousands and thousands of people sleeping on the street, but you're staying busy building affordable housing. I care about people, and caring about people is what directs my politics. You know what I mean? I don't like to put political labels on myself other than I'm a humanist. So I just want to thank you for doing the Truths and I Do's, because how many, we're talking about Watts, California. Watts, California alone, and yes, if you happen to live in Denver, which none of you probably do, vote for Terrance Roberts, call your auntie, call your mama, call your little sister, call your college friend.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about
it.
Okay, so political power, right? This is your goal now. This is how you intend to bring the change that you believe Denver needs. How is that going to happen? Is a general public in Denver open to you?
A yes and a no. Either people love me, like, yes, Terrance is the guy, or people are like, he is the biggest piece of crap known to man. I will kick him in the nuts right now if he was standing in front of me. And I'm being honest.
Sounds
they
like
feel the
America
same way.
today.
They feel the same way about Julian. But I'm not a perfect person.
Because we have some front runners that love you. Can't
Yeah,
say that.
but I mean, besides not being a perfect human, I didn't do anything to deserve this. I literally, so I was moving into that Boys and Girls Club, that Anschutz Center, and I'll call you in just a second. And we were waiting for $5,500 worth of IKEA furniture when the shooting happened. So when they were surrounding, right before they started surrounding me to assault me, I was looking for my IKEA van. I was like, where's the IKEA van? Where's my furniture? Then here comes all these bloods. Because I didn't know I was going to be in a documentary. I didn't know I was going to have to defend myself until Hassan told me. Because when they first started surrounding me, I asked them, I said, why are you doing this to me? Because I knew they were going to jump me. I knew what was going to happen, and he told me that what was going to happen. But so after the shooting, after all of these things, I was going to stop. I'm going to be honest, I was going to retire from activism. Because my budget for Prodigal Son was like over $350,000 a year. I had to step away. I couldn't raise any money. I had 4 staff members. I had an accountant who did my accounting. I had to pay him. So I couldn't manage it. So I stepped away. And then Nipsey Hussle was murdered in Los Angeles, and I had all these Bloods and Crips calling me like, well, the Bloods and Crips in LA are getting together. What are we going to do in Denver? So I was like, well, let's do it again, you know? So we did some Hilda Hoods, and then Elijah McClain was murdered. So the family was like, Terrance, man, we need you to bring that bullhorn out because we don't have any revolutionaries in Denver. And so I just stepped up to do that. But then I was arrested. They gave me 2 felonies for inciting a riot. They gave me all these misdemeanors. I was looking at 24 years in prison. I have kids myself. I was working for Zillow at the time. Like, they ended up letting me go. Like, I paid a lot. I paid over $10,000 doing those protests. We bought our own T-shirts. Because I said I'll never do a 501c3 again unless someone else is raising the money. I got a salary and a budget. Because it was really hard on me and my family, man, starting at 501c3. So after I was arrested, I was sitting in the jail cell yet again for erroneous charges. I said, I can't keep doing this like this. I can't just keep pumping this $69 bullhorn that I got off of Amazon. So in 2020, we got a lot of action in 2020 because George Floyd was murdered. It was COVID. I was able to get 10,000 people downtown. That's where the real power is. If you could get 10,000 people somewhere, that's where the real power is. But good luck getting 10,000 people anywhere. I don't care who you are, unless there's another COVID or another George Floyd. And the work continues. And, you know, the change is really in policy. You know, and I said I'm gonna run for mayor, even if I lose. Right now, Denver, Colorado, career politicians are openly, publicly stealing my platform. So I'm like, even if I lose, just go do it. You know what I mean? But there's a good chance I'm going to win this election because the power is in the people. I've not raised $1 million. I've got 1 million prayers, and it's working. I'm lockstep with all of the career politicians. There's a chance I can be the next mayor of Denver.
He would get mad at me if I said
So,
that he's a shoo-in for certain seats and he went for mayor. He's a shoo-in to win certain roles, but he went to make
I
this
wish we
decision.
could all vote.
Who wants to be a
there,
congressman
but
when you
I
can be
wanna-
mayor of
I
Denver?
just want we've been warned that we need to clear the house, but I do want to open it up to like 2 questions. If
Somebody
there's
back there.
anybody in,
Oh, can we
Yes.
introduce that brother right there? Can you stand there, brother? Can you introduce him real quick?
let me just bring up the mic.
Well, there's Frank and then
Come up
Andrea.
here, Frank. Come up here.
They work
Come
for
on.
go ahead and introduce.
No,
Come on up, come on up.
Come up. This is not about us. This is about you. We good. I just want to say thank you, honestly. Like, my name is Shayna Harrison. I'm an education director for New Yorkers Against Gun Violence.
Yes.
This is my entire team. We teach gun violence prevention programs, field credit programs in New York City high schools all around the city. We also have a social worker who does a lot of work on some of the things that you guys were talking about as well. But I just wanted to say thank you to everyone here, but especially to folks who worked on this project, and to you guys, because I know how hard this is, how much work it took to do this. But I mean, you know, I hope you win. But I will say to you, more than anything, I'm just grateful that you're running, because it's important. We work with young people every day who are perpetrators of violence. They pick up guns. They have guns. They think guns protect them. And they do. And a lot of times, right, in a lot of spaces. Like, I know you're 22 times more likely to kill someone you love or yourself if you have a gun in your home, in your presence, right? If guns change your decision-making process, it's all of that. I know that. But I also know that there are some young people in my classroom who probably wouldn't have made it there that day if they didn't have a gun, right? So this is where we are, right? And we have to change the face of what an activist looks like, because activists can't look like you, right? And when coming from our community, our kids, they don't think that they can do this work because they've done other work. And you're very important because you show them that you can be this, that, and that, right? It's no one way to do this work, right? So this is why you're important. This is why this conversation is important. I wish there were young people here because more than anything, they need to understand that you don't have to leave your community. You can wear that shirt, them sneakers, you can talk the way that you do, and you can still do this work.
Yes.
That's what's really important to me about what's happening here. And in addition to that, I do want to just scream this out loud, that it's a lot easier for some young people to do this work, depending on the color of their skin and where they live. They are looked at as heroes. Other young people are looked at as snitches.
Oh.
So when we're asking our young people to stand up and protect their community and fight for their community, we really need to understand what that means and be able to give these young people resources, support to do the work that we're asking them to do. Pay them. They need social support. They need mental health support. They need safe places to live. They need all of that stuff if you want them to do this work. And I'm not talking about snitching. But I'm talking about sitting next to another young person and saying, yo, you good, you don't gotta do that. That's hard to do. Acknowledge the work and how hard this is for a 17-year-old kid who's just making a different decision but still lives in that neighborhood. Acknowledge how hard that work is. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I think we actually have to clear the house.
One more comment from Brother.
One more
Yeah.
comment,
Right, yeah.
and
Again, thank you, Julie, for hosting this, and thank you, Terrance. That was the most beautiful thing I've seen in a long time, right? Again, I'm Frank Taylor. I'm from Shana's team. I did ironically in our curriculum we're on masculinity and its intersection with violence, right? Exploring the roots of that. So my question to you that was spurred while watching your film was, I think that we grow up in some marginalized communities that kind of emphasize that market a form of masculinity that is possible for us to survive, right? And unfortunately, sometimes it lands us to decisions and places that we don't want to be. So through prison, I know that you've had a lot of growth and you did a lot of unlearning. My question is, what are some of the views you had on masculinity early in your life, probably when you were in your teens, that going to prison allowed you to unlearn and that you see differently than you saw about 30 years ago?
So two statements on that. So I definitely believe in toxic masculinity. There's a yin and a yang. There's toxic femininity too. But too often abusers happen to be angry men. And my knuckles on my hands used to be so busted. I was a light-skinned, young little pretty boy kid back in the day, full of anger from domestic violence and stuff going on in my home. So I looked like a little punk, and I was getting teased a lot, but I was fighting a lot, fighting kids, fighting. They were beating me up. Denver is not LA. Denver is not in New York. But if you're caught in that street life, it is not safe for those kids in Denver. It is a war going on in those streets because they want to be like LA. They want to be like these kids in New York. So it wasn't a bunch of women punching me in my face growing up because of my skin tone or because of what I was wearing. It was a lot of angry young men. Okay, the angry young women were expressing their anger in different ways, but it wasn't coming out as violence. So yes, there is a thing with angry young boys feeling like, oh, if you've never killed nobody, you a goofy or you a punk. So while we sitting here doing this work, Aqeela's doing policy, I'm running for mayor, all of these things, we're trying to keep these young boys out of a gang, but then we have another sub-culture of young men who's like, oh, you over there with Aqeela or Terrance or Frank, you a goofy, you a punk. Because we killing, not just beating people, we're killing people. You can't even be a rapper nowadays if you haven't murdered somebody. Nobody wants to hear your music. So, when we talk about toxic masculinity and dealing with these young boys, we have to really think about the domestic violence, the poverty, and the anger, and the subculture that they have to survive by telling a group of really rough kids, I don't want to kill somebody. Man, that can get you punched in your face. You have to really teach these kids it's okay if somebody calls you a punk or a goofy, because those are just words. Come make a movie with me. Let's go help somebody if you want to help Brooklyn or Watts or Park Hill or Compton. And it was working, man. If your program is not cooler than the Bloods or the Crips, your kids is gonna be Bloods or Crips. They're kids.
Right.
And if your after school program can't keep a kid safer than the Bloods or the Crips can, you can't blame a 13-year-old for being with people who's gonna make sure they live to be 40 if you can't make sure they live to be 40, because they got to live to be 40. And that's why I model Prodigal Son to say, you're safe over here. No, we're not a gang. We can't beat up the Bloods. We can't beat up 5,000 Denver Crips. But as long as it's 50 of us over here, good luck with that 25 of them coming over to here. Because, yeah, I don't condone violence, but I'm going to defend myself. And I have a right to life. I have a right to run my program. And it worked for 6 years until law enforcement forcefully used that toxic masculinity to push me out. So
It
we
was
talked
working.
to the young boys.
It was working. The
It worked
system
great.
didn't want it to work. It was working.
We have to.
Thank you, everybody, for coming to this.